It was supposed to be the flight of a lifetime, a celebration of a new beginning. But for 22-year-old Serena Washington, her first-class ticket turned into a public nightmare. When a senior flight attendant saw her, she didn't see a passenger. She saw a problem. The confrontation escalated, the accusations grew, and then came the call. "I need police at the gate. We have an unruly passenger." As two officers boarded the plane to remove her, the very last passenger walked in. The flight attendant turned, smiled, and her entire world froze. She had just tried to humiliate the wrong woman, and the karma that followed was swift, brutal, and absolutely devastating. The muffled chaos of LAX's Tom Bradley International Terminal was a symphony of stress. Beeping carts, frantic final boarding calls, the plastic wrap squeal from the luggage station. It was an ocean of anxiety. But not for Serena Washington. At 22, she was walking on air, clutching a ticket that felt more like a trophy. She'd just graduated from Stanford, summa cum laude, with a degree in computer science and a minor in art history, a combination that made her new employer, the tech giant Aura, pursue her relentlessly. This flight, Global Airlines Flight 12, non-stop from LAX to London Heathrow, was her relocation flight. Her life was starting, and it was starting in Seat 2A, first class. Serena looked the part. She wore a tailored beige blazer over a simple white silk shell, dark wash jeans that were probably more expensive than they looked, and clean white sneakers. Her hair was styled in neat, intricate box braids, pulled back into an elegant, low bun. In her hand, a worn, leather-bound copy of Parable of the Sower. She was the very picture of modern, understated success. She approached the priority boarding lane, Gate 155. The gate agent, a tired-looking man, scanned her boarding pass. Beep. "Enjoy your flight, Ms. Washington." "Thank you." Serena smiled, her voice warm. She stepped onto the jet bridge, the scent of filtered air and faint jet fuel hitting her. This was it. She turned left into the cabin, a move she'd only ever dreamed of making. The first-class cabin of the 7LSM7 was a hush of soft greys and deep blues. It was only half full. A man in a rumpled suit was already asleep in 1A. A woman with sharp cheekbones and sharper sunglasses was scrolling through her phone in 3K. And then there was the flight attendant. She was a woman in her late 50s with a helmet of stiff, blonde sprayed hair and a name tag that read Karen. Beneath it, a small pin read Senior Purser, 30 years. She was bustling, rearranging pillows with sharp, aggressive pats. When Serena stepped in, Karen's activity stopped. She didn't smile. She didn't say, "Welcome aboard." She simply watched Serena walk past, her eyes tracking her from her sneakers to her braids. Serena found 2A, a beautiful pod by the window. She smiled at Karen. "Good morning." Karen's reply was flat, her eyes scanning the seat number and then Serena. "Morning." Serena carefully stowed her carry-on, a sleek roller, in the overhead bin. As she sat down, she felt Karen's stare burning into the side of her head. It was a look Serena knew well. It was the "Are you lost, honey?" look. It was the "Economy is that way" look. Serena settled in, marveling at the sheer space, the little amenity kit, the noise-cancelling headphones in their own compartment. She was giddy. Karen reappeared, holding a silver tray with glasses of champagne, orange juice, and water. She served the man in 1A. She served the woman in 3K. She walked right past Serena, offering a glass to a man who had just sat down in 4A. Serena waited, assuming she'd just missed her, but Karen started walking back to the galley. "Excuse me," Serena called out, her voice polite but clear. Karen stopped, turning with a sigh so theatrical it could have won an award. "Yes." "I think you missed me. I'd love a glass of water, please. Karen's eyes narrowed. She looked at Serena, then at the empty seat next to her, then back at Serena. "Mum," she said, her voice dripping with false patience, "this cabin is for first-class passengers only." The silence that followed was heavy. The man in 4A looked up from his paper. Serena's smile didn't falter, but her eyes went cold. "I know," she said, holding up her boarding pass. "Seat 2A, Serena Washington. That's me." Karen's face pinched. She hated being wrong. Without a word, she spun around, walked to the galley, and returned, not with the tray, but with a single plastic cup of water, the kind they served in the back. She practically slammed it onto Serena's console. "Here, you'll need to put that away for takeoff." She stalked off. Serena stared at the plastic cup, then at the elegant crystal flute the woman in 3K was sipping from. The message was clear. "You don't belong here." A man across the aisle, a kind-looking gentleman in his 40s who was quietly reading a script. He looked familiar, maybe an actor. Caught her eye and gave her a small, sympathetic grimace. Serena gave him a tight-lipped smile and turned to look out the window. She would not let this woman ruin this moment. This was her flight, her new life. She had earned this. But as the cabin doors were prepared for closing, Serena watched Karen whispering animatedly with another flight attendant in the galley. They both glanced over at her. Karen was shaking her head, her face a mask of suspicion. The pre-departure announcements began, but Serena couldn't hear them. A pit of dread was forming in her stomach. This was far from over. Karen wasn't just rude, she was on a mission, and Serena, in seat 2A, was her target. The 777 pushed back from the gate, its massive engines whining to life. Serena, determined to reclaim her peace, slipped on the airline-provided headphones and sank into the new Oppenheimer soundtrack. She closed her eyes, focusing on the rumbling vibration of the aircraft, letting the music wash over the insult. She would be professional. She would be composed. She was an aura engineer, not someone to be rattled by a bitter flight attendant. The takeoff was smooth. As the plane climbed through the thin marine layer and burst into the blinding California sunshine, Serena finally allowed herself to relax. She opened her laptop, intending to review some onboarding documents. An hour into the flight, the fasten seatbelt sign pinged off. The cabin crew began the first-class meal service. Karen was in charge. She moved through the cabin with a clipboard, taking orders. Her voice, when speaking to the other passengers, was a syrupy sweet melody. "Mr. Davies," she said to the actor type across the aisle, "the sea base is just divine today. Can I highly recommend it?" "That sounds wonderful, thank you, Karen," he replied. She got to Serena's row. She ignored her, bending down to speak to the man in 2C, who had boarded just before pushback. She took his order, and then, without so much as a glance at Serena, turned to walk away. "Excuse me," Serena said, louder this time. She had taken off her headphones. Karen stopped, turning so slowly it was an act of defiance. "Were you speaking to me?" "Yes," Serena said, her patience stretched thin. "You haven't taken my meal order." Karen blinked, feigning surprise. "Oh, I assumed you were asleep." Serena gestured to her open laptop, the screen glowing. "I'm clearly not. I'd like to see the menu, please." Karen's thin lips pressed into a white line. "We're rather busy, Mom. I'll get you one when I can." "I'm sure you will," Serena said, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more commanding than a shout. "But the passenger in 2C just ordered, and the passenger in 3K is already eating. I'd like to order now." This Karen couldn't ignore. The other passengers were watching. Mr. Davies was peeking over his script, his brow furrowed. Defeated for the moment, Karen snatched a leather-bound menu from a slot and thrust it at Serena. "The sea bass and the fillet are gone," she snapped. "We only have the vegetarian pasta." It was a blatant lie. She hadn't even checked. She was punishing Serena for challenging her. Serena looked at the menu. "That's fine," she said, her composure immovable. "The pasta sounds lovely, and I'll have a ginger ale, please, with lime." Karen stared at her for a second too long, as if trying to find a crack in the armor. Finding none, she spun on her heel and vanished. When the meal came, it was delivered by the other, younger flight attendant, a woman named Chloe, who seemed visibly nervous. She placed the tray down with a small, apologetic smile. "Here's your pasta, Ms. Washington." "Thank you, Chloe," Serena said, making a point to read her name tag. The meal was, in fact, delicious. Serena ate slowly, savoring it. She was winning. She was remaining calm, and Karen was only making herself look bad. But Karen was a 30-year veteran of cabin politics. She knew how to escalate. As Chloe returned to clear Serena's tray, Karen reappeared from the galley, holding a full pot of coffee. Just as Chloe leaned in to take the tray, Karen tripped over her own feet, lurching forward. "Whoops!" she cried out. Hot coffee splashed, not on Serena, but all over her open laptop. "Oh!" Serena yelped, jumping back as the dark liquid flooded her keyboard. The screen flickered and died. "Oh my goodness!" Karen shrieked, her voice a caricature of concern. "I am so sorry. You had your device so close to the aisle." Serena was speechless. She stared at the smoking, dripping laptop. It was her brand-new, company-issued Aura machine. It had all her onboarding materials, her personal files, everything. It was ruined. "Chloe, get a cloth," Karen commanded, sounding for all the world like a concerned manager. Chloe scrambled, her face pale. Mr. Davies across the aisle was staring. "Okay, that did not look like an accident." Serena was trembling, not with fear, but with a sudden, white-hot rage. She grabbed her napkin, trying to sop up the mess, but it was too late. The laptop was dead. I can't believe," Serena stammered. "Well, these things happen," Karen said, her tone suddenly shifting from concerned to condescending. "It's policy to always keep electronic devices secure during service. You really should have been more careful." She was blaming her. Serena stood up, her 5x9 frame unfolding from the seat. She was now eye to eye with the flight attendant. "You did that on purpose," Serena said, her voice dangerously low. The cabin went silent. This was the moment Karen had been waiting for. This was the reaction she wanted. "Mom," Karen said, stepping back and putting a hand to her chest. "Are you threatening me?" "I will not be threatened by a passenger." "I'm not threatening you," Serena said, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "I am telling you. You saw my laptop, you tripped, and you destroyed my property. You've been targeting me since I boarded." "Targeting you?" Karen gasped, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "I would never. I think you're upset and overreacting. Now I'm going to have to ask you to sit down and lower your voice. You are creating a disturbance." "I am the one who was just wronged," Serena shot back, her composure finally cracking. "You destroyed my computer." "Sit down. Now," Karen commanded, her voice like steel, "or I will have the captain divert this flight." Serena looked around. The other passengers were staring, some with sympathy, others with annoyance. She was being painted as the angry black woman. It was a classic, disgusting trap, and she had walked right into it. Defeated, she slowly sank back into her seat. She was shaking. Karen smiled, a tiny, toxic, triumphant smirk. She turned to the cabin. "My apologies for the disturbance," ladies and gentlemen." She walked back to the galley, picked up the intercom and dialed the cockpit. Serena watched her, a new, colder dread settling in. It wasn't over. Karen hadn't just won the battle. She was preparing to win the war. Serena sat in the damp, coffee-soaked seat, her heart hammering against her ribs. The smell of burnt coffee was acrid, a physical manifestation of her humiliation. She stared at the blank, dead screen of her laptop. It was more than a machine. It was her future, her connection to her new life, and Karen had destroyed it with casual, calculated malice. Across the aisle, Mr. Davies was typing furiously into his phone, his screen angled away. He kept glancing at Serena, then at the galley. He was, she realized, taking notes. In the galley, Karen was no longer pretending. She was speaking in a hushed whisper to Chloe, but it was loud enough to carry. Absolutely unhinged, you saw her. She stood up, got right in my face. I felt physically threatened. My God, I thought she was going to hit me. These upgrades, they just don't know how to act. Probably her first time out of coach. Chloe's voice was a nervous murmur. Karen, I don't know. She just seemed upset about her laptop. Upset? That was more than upset, Chloe. That was aggression. We have a zero-tolerance policy for that. I am not risking the safety of this cabin for 10 more hours. Serena's blood ran cold. Divert the flight? Surely not. That would be insane. It would be a nightmare. Blacklisted from the airline, possibly arrested. Karen picked up the internal phone again. This time, she wasn't calling the cockpit. Serena watched as she dialed a different extension, her face set in a mask of grim determination. She was talking, but her voice was too low to hear. She kept nodding, her eyes darting to Serena. A few minutes later, the younger flight attendant, Chloe, approached Serena's seat. Her face was ashen. "Ms. Washington," she said, her voice barely audible. Serena looked up, dreading what came next. "Karen, Purser Peterson, she needs to see your boarding pass again." "And your passport." Serena frowned. "Why?" "You already scanned it at the gate." "It's just, she needs to verify the passenger manifest," Chloe stammered, clearly hating every second of this. "Verify it for what?" Serena asked, but she already knew. This was the prelude to an execution. With trembling hands, Serena pulled her passport and the printed-out boarding pass from her bag. She handed them over. Chloe scurried back to the galley. Serena watched as Karen took the documents. She stared at Serena's passport photo, then at Serena, as if comparing a known fugitive to a wanted poster. She typed something into the crew computer terminal. "Unbelievable," Karen muttered, loud enough for Serena to hear. She picked up the phone again. "Captain," Karen said, her voice now crisp and official. "This is Purser Peterson. I'm in the forward galley. I have a situation with passenger 2A, Serena Washington." A pause. "No, sir. She hasn't physically assaulted me yet, but she became verbally abusive. She threatened me, and she is creating an atmosphere of intimidation in the first-class cabin. I've already had another passenger complain." This was a bald-faced lie. No one had complained, except to Serena. "Yes, sir. I understand. No, I don't think it's necessary to divert. Not yet. But we are still on the ground. Technically. We're just pulling off the gate." Serena's heart stopped. Pulling off the gate? She looked out the window. She had been so consumed by the drama that she hadn't even noticed. The plane wasn't at 30,000 feet. It was still at LAX. The smooth takeoff, the climb, the meal service. It had all been a stress-induced daydream, a hallucination. She had boarded, Karen had been rude, and she had sat down. The entire confrontation, the coffee, the laptop, the argument, had been a high-speed anxiety dream she'd had while dozing off before pushback. She blinked, disoriented. Her laptop was in her bag, safe. Her seat was dry. The cabin door was still open. She had woken up to the sound of Karen's real voice. "Yes, at the gate. I'm telling you, this woman is a security risk. She's not following crew instructions." Serena was completely, terrifyingly confused. What was happening? Karen was standing over her. Not in a dream. This was real. "Mum, I need you to gather your belongings," Karen said, her voice like ice. "What? Why?" Serena's voice was thick with sleep and confusion. "You refused to stow your carry-on bag under the seat in front of you. That is a federal aviation regulation. I have asked you 3 times. Serena looked down. Her small designer handbag was at her feet. Not her roller bag, which was in the overhead, but her purse. I was just about to," Serena said, realizing she must have fallen asleep before doing it. "I'm sorry I dozed off." "It's too late for apologies," Karen snapped. "You were defiant. You looked right at me and then deliberately closed your eyes. I will not have my authority questioned. You are being removed from this flight." This was the real conflict, not some dramatic, coffee-spilling fantasy, but a petty, vile abuse of power over a handbag. "You're removing me for my purse?" Serena was incredulous. "I'm removing you for failing to comply with a flight attendant's safety instructions," Karen retorted. "You're a threat." "That's insane! I'm not a threat. I fell asleep." Serena's voice was rising, panic setting in. This was worse than her nightmare. It was quieter, more bureaucratic, and infinitely more sinister. "That's what they all say," Karen sneered. She turned to the open door of the aircraft. "He's here." A gate agent, the same tired-looking man from before, stepped onto the plane. He looked deeply uncomfortable. "Purser Peterson, you called for a removal?" "Yes. Passenger 2A. Refused to follow safety commands. Belligerent and non-compliant." "Mom," the gate agent said to Serena, "is this true?" "No," Serena said, her voice desperate. "I just fell asleep. I didn't even hear her. Look, my bag is stowed now." She'd frantically stuffed it under the seat. "She's lying," Karen said, her arms crossed. "She's trying to get out of it now. I want her off. I don't feel safe with her on my plane." The gate agent sighed. He was caught between a furious passenger and a senior purser. He knew who would win. "Mom, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." "No, I'm not leaving. I have a valid ticket. I am flying to my new job. You can't do this." Karen's eyes glittered. This was exactly what she wanted. A scene. Now Serena was the unruly passenger. "She's refusing to deplane," Karen announced to the gate agent. "You know the protocol. Call them." The gate agent grimaced. He spoke into his radio. "Dispatch. This is Agent Miller at 155. The purser is requesting law enforcement assistance for a passenger removal. Non-compliant." Serena's world collapsed. This wasn't a dream. This was real. The flight attendant, Karen Peterson, was having her arrested. For nothing. The entire cabin was now silent, all eyes on her. The woman in 3K was openly filming on her phone. Mr. Davies looked horrified. "Karen," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "This is a gross overreaction. The young lady just fell asleep. I saw it." Karen whirled on him. "Sir, I will have you removed as well for interfering with a flight crew." He held up his hands, but his eyes were angry. 2 minutes later, 2 LAX airport police officers, big men in dark blue uniforms, stepped onto the jet bridge and paused at the aircraft door. Their holsters and radios seemed to suck all the air out of the cabin. "What's the problem here?" the first officer asked, his voice pure, no nonsense. Karen pointed a manicured finger at Serena. Her. Seat 2A. She has been belligerent, non-compliant with safety regulations, and is now refusing to deplane. We want her removed. The officers stepped into the cabin. They looked at Serena, a young, well-dressed black woman sitting in first class, and their faces hardened. They'd seen this type before, or so they thought. "Ma'am," the first officer said, his hand resting near his belt, "we need you to gather your personal items and come with us. Right now." Time seemed to slow down. The hum of the auxiliary power unit, the recirculated air, the glint of the officer's badge, every detail was hyper-focused. Serena was frozen, trapped between the cold plastic of the window and the unyielding stare of the police officer. "Officer, please," Serena tried, her voice shaking but desperate to sound rational. "There is a massive misunderstanding. I fell asleep. I didn't hear her instruction. My bag is stowed. I am not a threat to anyone." "Ma'am, we're past the point of discussion," the second officer said, his voice flat. He was already impatient. "The flight crew has the right to refuse service to any passenger. They've made their decision. You can either walk off this plane, or you can be escorted off. It's your choice." Escorted meant handcuffs. It meant a scene. It meant a criminal record. Karen stood by the galley, her arms crossed, a look of pure, venomous triumph on her face. She had won. She had taken one look at Serena Washington and decided she didn't belong, and she had used the full power of federal regulations and law enforcement to make her decision a reality. I... Serena's eyes darted around. The woman in 3K was still filming, her phone held high. The man in 1A was awake now, peering over his seat. Mr. Davies looked furious but helpless. "Get your bag," the first officer commanded, stepping further into the aisle. Defeated, humiliated, and fighting back tears of sheer rage, Serena unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood up slowly. She was going to be marched out of first class like a criminal. Her new life in London, her job at Aura. Would they rescind the offer? Would she be put on a no-fly list? She reached up to the overhead bin to retrieve her roller bag. "Stop right there," the officer barked, his hand moving. "Don't make any sudden moves, Mum. I'll get the bag." He thought she was reaching for a weapon. Serena froze, her hands half raised. "It's just my suitcase," she whispered, tears finally welling up and spilling over. "This is utterly disgraceful," Mr. Davies said loudly from his seat. "Her name is Serena Washington. She's done nothing. Your name is Karen, isn't it? I'll be reporting this, I assure you." "You do that," Karen sneered, unafraid. "I'm just doing my job." As the officer reached for her bag, a voice came from the jet bridge. A calm, deep, authoritative voice. "What in God's name is going on in here?" Everyone turned. The jet bridge was dark, but a man was silhouetted against the light of the terminal. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark navy suit, not a crew uniform. He was the last passenger to board. He stepped into the bright light of the cabin, pulling a simple black roller bag. He was a black man in his late 50s. His hair was a distinguished salt and pepper, his face lined with an expression that was part exhaustion, part sharp intelligence. He looked like someone who didn't just fly first class, but who belonged in a boardroom. He stopped, his eyes taking in the entire terrible tableau, the two police officers, the weeping Serena, and the smug Karen. His eyes landed on Serena. His entire demeanor changed. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a sharp, sudden alarm. "Serena?" he said, his voice echoing in the silent cabin. "What's happening? Why are these officers here? Are you hurt?" Serena's head snapped up. Her face, stained with tears, crumbled in relief. "Dad!" she choked out. The man, Robert Washington, strode into the cabin, dropping his bag in the aisle. He put a protective arm around his daughter, pulling her away from the police officer. "Serena, talk to me. What happened?" She's kicking me off the plane," Serena sobbed, pointing at Karen. "She said I was non-compliant. She said I was a threat. She called them on me." Robert Washington's gaze shifted from his daughter to Karen. It was not an angry look. It was cold. It was the look of a scientist examining a bacterium. He looked at her smug face, and then, very deliberately, he looked down at her name tag. Karen Peterson, Senior Purser. Karen's smugness hadn't wavered. If anything, she looked annoyed by the interruption. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step back," she said, her voice sharp. "This is a security matter. This person is being removed from my aircraft." Robert Washington looked at her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. "Your aircraft?" he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Yes. I am the purser in charge." "Now, officers," she said, turning to the police. "Please remove them both. This man is clearly interfering." The first officer, sensing a new dynamic, hesitated. "Sir, if you'll just step aside, we can handle this." "Dad, I'm so sorry," Serena wept into his suit. "I just fell asleep. My bag was at my feet." Robert just rubbed her back, his eyes locked on Karen. He reached into his breast pocket, slowly, so as not to alarm the officers. He didn't pull out a wallet. He pulled out a laminated ID on a Global Airlines lanyard. He held it up for Karen to see. Karen squinted at it, her brows furrowing in confusion. "Crew credentials. You're not on this flight's roster, I checked." Her voice trailed off. Her eyes widened. She wasn't just looking at a crew ID. She was reading the title under the name. Robert Washington. Senior Vice President, In-Flight Operations. The entire cabin was silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. Karen's face, which had been pinched with smugness, slackened. The blood drained from it, leaving behind a waxy, pale mask. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked from the ID to Robert's face, to Serena's face, and back to the ID. Washington. Washington. The same last name. Dad. This wasn't just a crew member. This wasn't a pilot or a fellow flight attendant. This was the man whose signature was on her paychecks. This was the new SVP, the one who had just transferred from the Chicago hub, the one everyone was terrified of, the one in charge of all flight operations, all pursers, all in-flight staff for the entire airline. Karen Peterson, 30-year veteran, senior purser, just called the police on her new boss's daughter. She didn't just make a mistake, she had just detonated her entire career. Her hands began to shake, her helmet of hair seemed to wilt. "Sir, I, she stammered. Robert Washington held up a hand. His voice, when he spoke, was pure ice. Not one word. He turned to the two police officers, who now looked deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. "Officers," Robert said, his voice clipped and professional. "My name is Robert Washington. I am the Senior Vice President of this division. This is my daughter, Serena Washington, a ticketed and confirmed passenger in seat 2A. She is not a threat. She is not unruly. She is a 22-year-old girl on her way to her first job." He gestured to Karen. "This employee has a history of discretionary removals. I believe this situation is, shall we say, a gross abuse of her authority. There will be no removal today. You are no longer needed. Thank you for your time." The officers, recognizing a corporate meltdown that was far above their pay grade, were only too happy to escape. "Understood, sir," the first officer said, already backing out of the aisle. "Our apologies, Miss Washington. Have a good flight." They vanished, The cabin door was still open. Robert turned back to Karen. Her face was ashen. She looked like she was going to be sick. Mr. Washington. Sir, it was a misunderstanding. She was... The rules. The rules, Robert repeated, his voice dangerously soft. You're a rules person, are you, Karen? Yes, sir. Safety is paramount. Good, Robert nodded. Then you'll understand this. Your employment with Global Airlines is suspended, effective immediately. Hand me your crew badge. Karen's jaw dropped. Sir. What? You can't. In front of... Hand me. Your badge. Now. Shaking so badly she could barely unclip it, Karen Peterson detached her 30 years pin and her ID from her uniform. She held them out. Robert took them without touching her hand. You are relieved of duty. You will gather your personal belongings from the galley, and you will deplane. Now. Sir, please, she begged, her voice cracking, tears of panic in her eyes. It was... I made a mistake. You made a choice, Robert corrected her. You chose to see my daughter, a paying customer, as a threat. You chose to escalate. You chose to humiliate her. You chose to call the police on her. And I am choosing to fire you. He turned to the trembling Chloe. Chloe, you are now the acting purser for this flight. Please ensure the cabin is secure for departure. And please, he added, his voice softening just a fraction, get my daughter a glass of champagne. The real kind. Yes, Mr. Washington. Right away. Robert turned back to Karen, who was frozen in the aisle, badgeless. Get off my plane. With the entire first-class cabin watching in stunned silence, Karen Peterson, the 30-year senior purser, grabbed her handbag from the galley and did the walk of shame down the aisle. As she passed, Mr. Davies, the actor, looked up from his script. Have a lovely day, Karen, he said quietly. She stumbled out onto the jet bridge, and the gate agent, with a look of profound shock, pulled the heavy door shut behind her. The thud and squeal of the latch ceiling was the most satisfying sound Serena had ever heard. The cabin was silent for a moment. Then, from 1A, the man who had been sleeping started to clap, slowly, quietly. Mr. Davies joined in. Soon the entire first-class cabin was applauding. Serena, still shaking, finally let out a breath she felt she'd been holding since she stepped on the plane. Her father, his face still stern, finally looked at her. The anger melted, replaced by the warm, familiar love she'd known her whole life. He pulled her into a massive hug. I am so sorry, baby girl, he whispered. I'm sorry I was late. I was on a call with the COO. Dad, she whispered back, your timing was perfect. Robert Washington, SVP of in-flight operations, smiled. Well, he said, gesturing to the empty seat next to her, his assigned seat, 2C. I couldn't let my daughter fly to London all by herself, could I? He had planned to surprise her, and in the end, he had. In more ways than one. The rest of the flight was, for Serena, a surreal blur of luxury and recovery. Chloe, the new purser, was apologetic and almost comically attentive. The champagne flute was never empty. The meal service was impeccable. Mr. Davies leaned over before the movie started. My name is Andrew Davies, he said, handing her a business card. I'm a writer for a few network dramas. I saw that whole thing. I wrote down everything I witnessed, with time stamps. If you or your father need a witness for what really happened before he boarded, I'm your man. That was the most disgusting abuse of power I've ever seen. Serena took the card, deeply grateful. Thank you, Mr. Davies. I can't tell you how much that means. Please, he smiled. Call me Andy, and frankly, your father is my new hero. Robert Washington spent the first 2 hours of the flight on the plane's Wi-Fi, his fingers flying across his phone and laptop. He was on email with HR, with the legal department, and with the head of the flight attendants union. He was not just suspending Karen, he was building the case for her termination. "She's not going to get away with this, Serena," he said, his voice grim as he sipped a black coffee. "This isn't just about you. This is about everyone she's done this to before. Her file is troubling." "What do you mean?" "I pulled her record. In the last 5 years, she has filed 14 passenger non-compliance reports that resulted in a removal. 12 of them were against people of color. 6 of them, 6, were for improperly stowed bags in first or business class. The other 2 were for speaking in a loud tone. The company has settled 3 lawsuits." Serena was sickened. "So I was just her Tuesday?" "You were," Robert said, his eyes hard. "You were her Tuesday, but you're her last. I promise you that." But Karen Peterson was not going to go quietly. When she landed back in LA, bumped to a middle seat in economy on a different airline, as Robert had voided her flight privileges, she immediately called her union representative. But the union, seeing the witness list, a well-known writer, the presence of the SVP, and her own spotty file, was hesitant. So Karen went nuclear. She hired a high-profile, shark-toothed employment lawyer named Bradley Thorne. 2 weeks later, as Serena was settling into her new London flat, Robert received the email, "Karen Peterson vs. Global Airlines and Robert Washington." The lawsuit wasn't just for wrongful termination. It was for public humiliation, defamation, and most shockingly, racial discrimination. The lawsuit alleged that Robert Washington, a black executive, had used his newfound power to target a senior, white, female employee to settle a personal vendetta. It claimed Karen was acting in the interest of federal air safety, and that Robert's disproportionate and aggressive response was proof of his own racial bias against her. It was, in short, a masterpiece of legal audacity. "She's playing the victim," Robert growled on a FaceTime call with Serena. "Dad, can she win?" Serena asked, her heart sinking. "She can't win on the merits," Robert said, "but she can make this very, very public. Thorne is a media circus lawyer. He's going to leak this. He's going to try and paint me as the angry black man who fired a poor, innocent older woman. He's going to try and ruin my reputation. And yours." He was right. The next day, a sleazy aviation blog ran the headline, "Global Airlines, SVP fires, veteran flight attendant on the spot in front of passengers, to protect his unruly daughter." The story was completely one-sided, quoting an anonymous source, clearly Karen, who claimed Serena had been drunk and belligerent, and that Karen had feared for her life. The comment section was a predictable cesspool. Typical diversity hire, power goes right to his head. Probably a spoiled brat who thought rules didn't apply to her. Good for Karen, stood up to the affirmative action exec. Serena felt sick. They had twisted the truth until it was unrecognizable. Global Airlines' legal team wanted to settle. It was a PR nightmare. "Just pay her, Robert," the general counsel advised. "Make her sign an NDA, it's cleaner." Robert Washington slammed his hand on the table. "Absolutely not," he said, his voice echoing in the conference room. "We are not paying that woman 1 dime. We are not settling. We are going to fight this. We are going to countersue for reputational damage. And we are going to go to discovery. I want every text message, every email, every social media post she has ever written. We are not just going to win. We are going to end this." The legal team was stunned. This was not the clean way. "Robert," the counsel said, Discovery cuts both ways. Are you sure your own record is clean? Robert leaned forward. I've spent 30 years in this industry. I've never had a single complaint. My record is spotless. Hers is a landfill. I want you to dig. Dig deep. The fight was on. The legal battle stretched from weeks into months. Serena, trying to focus on her new job in London, was forced to give a lengthy, grueling deposition via video link. Bradley Thorne, Karen's lawyer, was as slimy as advertised. Miss Washington, isn't it true you were drinking before the flight? No. Isn't it true you called Purser Peterson a racist bitch? No, I absolutely did not. Isn't it true that you expect special treatment because of who your father is? That you believe your airline royalty? No, I didn't even know my father was going to be on that flight. It was a surprise. Thorne smiled. A surprise. How convenient. But Robert's legal team was digging, and they hit gold. First, they got the witness affidavit from Andrew Davies, which was articulate, precise, and painted Karen as the sole aggressor. Second, they got the video from the woman in 3K, which she had gleefully provided. It didn't capture the initial handbag incident, but it captured Karen's smug, triumphant expression, and her "she's refusing to deplane" line, which directly contradicted her claim that she was terrified. But the real bomb was buried in Karen's subpoenaed electronic records. Karen, it turned out, was smart enough not to use text messages, but she was part of a private Facebook group called Global Sky Crew, The Real Talk. The group was a toxic swamp of employee gossip, but Karen's posts were special. The airline's cyber forensics team pulled her entire history. January 14th. Had another rapper in 1C today. Sagging pants, gold teeth. I accidentally spilled a full tray of tomato juice on his bling. Whoops. February 5th. This new affirmative action push is a joke. Got a memo from the new Chicago SVP, Robert Washington, about implicit bias training. Yeah, I'll show him bias. What a clown. March 22nd. Oh, the worst. 3A's one of those types, loud on her phone in a language I don't recognize. Probably plotting something. I've flagged her suspicious behavior to the air marshal. You're welcome, America. The posts went on for years. It was a clear, undeniable pattern of targeted harassment against passengers of color, passengers who spoke other languages, and anyone who didn't fit her narrow 1950s-era view of a first-class passenger. It was a slam dunk. The lawsuit was dead. We have her, Robert said, a grim satisfaction on his face. Thorne is going to see this, and he will drop this case so fast his head will spin. We'll file for summary judgment. It's over. The legal team sent the file, all 400 pages of discovery, including the Facebook posts, to Bradley Thorne's office. They expected a call to settle for $0 within the hour. But the call that came wasn't from Thorne. It was from a different lawyer on Robert's team. A junior associate named Mark, who had been tasked with the most boring part of discovery, cross-referencing Karen's flight manifests and baggage logs with her financial statements. Mr. Washington? Mark's voice was shaking. I think I found something else. Something much, much worse. I was looking at her Facebook posts, and I cross-referenced the dates with her flight routes and her bank statements. What are you talking about, Mark? Robert said, impatient. Her post, the one about the rapper in 1C, that was a flight to Hong Kong. 2 days later, her bank statement shows a $15,000 cash deposit. She has these all the time, large cash deposits, always after an international flight to Asia. Hong Kong, Seoul, Tokyo. So? Robert said. Maybe she's a gambler. I don't think so, sir, Mark said. I looked at her baggage. She checks 4 massive empty suitcases on her way to Asia, and she checks 4 massive, very heavy suitcases on her way back. Every single time. As crew, they're rarely inspected by customs. A cold silence fell over the room. This wasn't an employment issue anymore. "What's more," Mark continued, his voice trembling. I looked at her other Facebook messages, the private ones. She's been messaging a luxury goods dealer in Los Angeles. She's been sending him photos. Got the new Birkins, 10 of them. The Rolexes are perfect fakes. Wired the money to your guy. Sir, I don't think she's just a racist. I think she's a smuggler. Karen Peterson, 30-year veteran, hadn't just been abusing passengers. She'd been using her senior crew privileges to run a high-volume international smuggling ring for counterfeit luxury goods. For years. The lawsuit she filed, the discovery she triggered, had just exposed it all. Robert Washington slowly lowered the phone. He looked at his legal team. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice a low growl, "forget Bradley Thorne. Get the U.S. Attorney's Office on the phone, and Homeland Security. Right now." The lawsuit for wrongful termination was dropped by Bradley Thorne the instant he was notified that his client was the subject of a federal criminal investigation. He cited irreconcilable differences and practically ran from the case. The karma that hit Karen Peterson was no longer corporate. It was federal. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection, armed with the evidence from the airline's discovery, didn't just investigate. They set a trap. They monitored her name on the next international flight roster. 2 weeks later, she tried to fly, using a buddy pass from another airline, on a shopping trip to Seoul. When her flight, Asiana 201, landed back at LAX, she was not met by a car service. She was met by 2 stone-faced CBP officers and an agent from Homeland Security Investigations. "Karen Peterson?" the agent asked. "Yes," she said, annoyed, pulling her 4 oversized, very heavy suitcases. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us to a secondary inspection room." Karen's waxy face went white. She knew this wasn't random. They opened the bags. Inside, packed in discreet false bottoms, were 15 super-fake Birkin bags, 30 counterfeit Rolex watches, and over 100 high-end Chanel purses. The street value was estimated at over $500,000. The evidence was overwhelming. The investigation unspooled her entire life. They found the offshore accounts. They found the network of dealers in LA and New York. She had, over 10 years, smuggled an estimated $20 million in counterfeit goods, evading millions in import tariffs and taxes. Her hard karma was no longer just about losing her job. It was about losing her freedom. 6 months later, Serena Washington flew back to Los Angeles, first class, on her father's friends and family pass. She wasn't going to court for the civil suit. That was long gone. She was going to the U.S. District Court to give a victim impact statement. Karen Peterson, dressed in an ill-fitting beige pantsuit, looked 20 years older. Her blonde helmet was gone, replaced by stringy, dull grey hair. She was pleading guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and 1 count of smuggling goods into the United States. When the judge asked if anyone wished to speak, Serena stood up. She walked to the podium, her hands steady. She didn't look at Karen. She addressed the judge. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and strong. "My name is Serena Washington. My encounter with Ms. Peterson was brief, but it was damaging. She tried to use her uniform, her authority, and her privilege to humiliate me. She tried to have me arrested simply because, in her eyes, my face didn't fit the seat I had paid for. She tried to weaponize the system against me." Serena paused, then looked directly at Karen. "But the system she tried to use is, in the end, a system of consequences. Her lawsuit against my family, an act of pure spite, was what brought her entire criminal enterprise to light. She was so blinded by her own hate that she, herself, provided the evidence to destroy her life. I am not here to ask for pity for myself. I am here to stand as proof that the truth, no matter how hard you try to bury it, will always find its way out. Ms. Peterson didn't just fail to see me as a person, she failed to see the consequences of her own actions, and for that she must be held accountable. Serena sat down. The judge looked at Karen. "Ms. Peterson, you have anything to say?" I'm sorry," Karen whimpered. "I'm so sorry, I lost my way." The judge was unmoved. "You didn't just lose your way, Ms. Peterson. You ran a criminal enterprise for a decade, hiding behind the uniform of a trusted airline. You abused your position, you violated federal law, and you did so with arrogance. And what brought you here? Not a brilliant investigation. Your own hubris. Your own bigotry. You filed a frivolous, malicious lawsuit, and in doing so, you handed the government the rope to hang you with. It is the most profound case of poetic justice this court has seen in years." He delivered the sentence. 60 months in federal prison. 5 years. As Karen was cuffed and led away, she looked back at Serena and Robert. Her eyes were no longer smug. They were hollow. Outside the courthouse, the reporters who had once hounded Robert now flocked to Serena. "Serena, how do you feel?" Serena looked at her father, who put a proud arm around her. She smiled at the cameras. "I feel," she said, "like justice was served, and I'm ready to get back to work." On the flight back to London that night, in seat 2A, Serena opened her new, company-provided laptop. She was no longer a victim. She was a survivor. And as the plane took off, climbing high above the city, she sipped her champagne and didn't look back. And that's how a single act of prejudice didn't just cost Karen her job, it cost her everything. The very system she tried to weaponize against Serena became the one that brought her to justice. She was so determined to prove Serena didn't belong, she accidentally proved that she was a federal criminal. That isn't just karma, that is poetic justice. What do you think? Was this the most deserved, hard karma story you've ever heard? Have you ever seen someone so spectacularly mess around and find out? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. This story is a powerful reminder that hate and hubris are a toxic combination. If you want more stories of real-life drama, instant justice, and unbelievable twists, make sure to hit that like button, share this with everyone you know, and subscribe to the channel for more. Don't miss what's coming next.